Assalamu alaikum and hello. Welcome to New Wave Global. I am Faryal. As we are in the middle of a cataclysmic monsoon spell in Pakistan, the northern areas being the worst hit, authorities have warned of more flash floods to come. Last week on New Wave Global, we spoke about the human toll as we talked of human death and destruction caused by climate change triggered flash floods, also focusing on human complicity in driving climate change. In today's show, we'll be talking about death and destruction caused to other species that share this planet with us, the trees lost, the wildlife displaced, the crop fields destroyed, the number of stray animals drowned while cities go inundated. We will be discussing the impact of floods on various species as they cause mortality through drowning, habitat destruction, changes in food availability, and ecosystem dynamics. Now, these interspecies losses are hardly documented, nor do they ever hit the headlines, highlighting the dire need for interspecies justice. My guest for today is Altamush Saeed, who is an award-winning interspecies justice lawyer, activist, and a filmmaker. He holds an LLM in animal law and environmental law from Lewis and Clark Law School, USA. Altamush teaches Pakistan's first interspecies justice law course at LUMS and NUST. He's the founding manager at Environmental and Animal Rights Consultants and the chair of Pakistan's first animal law committee at the Lahore High Court Bar Association. Altamash, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful there's a space to talk about these things.
Yeah. So the deadly deluge of August 15, after which at least 23 people have lost their lives as of today in heavy flash floods in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, with over 156 injured as monsoon rains, they continue across the country, triggering deadly floods and landslides. But as we grapple with rescue and relief efforts, there's hardly a mention of any efforts to save or keep account of damages to other species. Though when we talk of environmental protection, we are implying regard for the whole of environment, all ecosystems comprising all species. But we are clearly ignoring other affected species when we account for flood or other damages. Now, does this disregard limit the scope of our efforts to save the environment, since these species, they form a substantial part sharing planet Earth with us?
Absolutely. And I'm really grateful that you used the term interspecies justice because that's how I define my work. And the thing is, when we leave out animals and the environment, which is mostly the trees and the habitat and everything, there's a direct impact on leading to more disasters, which is something that's not studied that much. One of the leading causes of that is, for example, the food system. And that is because, as we know how animal agriculture, the plant-based agriculture happens, at least in the animal side of things, there's a lot of methane emissions. There are a lot of manure that's released in tons on an annual basis.
Mm.
And all the hormones and everything, they're going into the water table that people like, not people like us, we're privileged. People who don't have the privilege, who have to, unfortunately live there, go through those impacts. And most of them are people, who lack the economic incentives to find proper healthcare because they do not exist in those spaces. And secondly, systems like these, especially when it comes to cutting trees, for example, and going away of shade and everything, that leads to a rise in temperature and more greenhouse gas emissions, which in turns leads to more disasters, which in turn harms more human beings. So if you're thinking it from a purely human centric perspective, it is directly against our personal interest of preventing disasters. And I would actually take another step. I would say that, the environment has a key role because without it, we would not have the planet. And therefore, I mean, at least the animals, they're living beings and they have their own intrinsic rights given to them by few judgments of our high courts, especially the Islamabad High Court. In the case of Islamabad Wildlife Management Board versus Municipal Corporation Islamabad, which said that animals have sentient beings and they have their own rights.
Hmm.
and they're born with it. And Islam talks about the same things as well. So there's actually a connection between humans, animals, and the environment. And in academia, it's called One Health,
Hmm.
which, I take it one step ahead and I include justice. That's why I call it interspecies justice. So you can help them individually, but if you ignore the animals and the environment, the impact on human beings is much, much higher. And so whichever lens you want to use, it causes more disasters. That's the pain point that we need to discuss more
Hmm.
highly.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, like you just said, I mean, and of course, these disasters, whether they are flash floods or there's any other type of disaster, they directly mortality through drowning, through habitat destruction, and changes in food availability and ecosystem dynamics. Now, the effects they vary across species and ecosystems. Do we, to begin with, do we have a mechanism to record these type of damages in the first place that are caused to other species? For example, are the carcasses of dead animals they ever discovered, and do we ever keep account of that? And whose job is this to do so? Is it the disaster management
So
authorities that should be responsible?
They should, however, in the law, it's not covered under their domain. And I would like to read Section 2B of the National Disaster Management Act, which defines a disaster. It says that it's a catastrophe or a calamity in an affected area arising from natural or or man-made causes or by accident, which results in a substantial loss of lives of or human suffering or damage to and destruction of property. So, under this act, and generally under our legal structure, animals and the environment are considered property. Basically, and something that's living shouldn't be property because they're own living beings. However, the framing is completely anthropocentric, and that's like the main framing that we have in almost all of our laws. And as a result, so they're purposefully left out. However, when the floods of 2022 happened, and we have a lot of data available, the deaths of farm animals were recorded. And the only reason for that was because they were considered human property.
Absolutely.
That
And
was not because
they
in the interest of
directly
the
affect human
animals.
welfare. Yes, yes. Because something that
Exactly.
directly
So
affects
over
human
one,
welfare. Yeah.
yes, that's what's covered in every one of our laws. So by that default, by designating animal as property, we leave them out of everything, every legal structure in Pakistan.
Hmm. So man,
And for those who don't know, just wanted to mention that for those who don't know, even though only farm animal deaths were recorded in the 2022 floods, over 1.1 million farm animals died, and that's a huge number. But this doesn't include wild animals or any other kind of animals because they're not even considered because there is no human angle within it.
hmm.
There is, but it's not covered or studied or acknowledged
Hmm.
at all.
Yeah. We are, I mean, humans, we are the most supreme creation on earth. But then, that comes with a huge responsibility. That status basically comes with a
Exactly.
responsibility which we fail to fulfill. Our legal system, it is not the most prompt and efficient, even for mankind. um, uh,
Yes,
who
unfortunately.
basically is this, we are the architects of the system, and yet it fails us, let alone how it's going to work for other species. Now, this reinforces that such losses are perhaps neither investigated nor documented. Do we have laws on interspecies justice? You just, I know, briefly touched that, but if you could just tell us a little more about if we have such laws, or if there are such laws anywhere else in the world, maybe in the developed part of the world, and how can implementation be ensured, particularly in our context, if we do have them?
So, in Pakistan, mostly the main angle that's, considered under interspecies justice is always the human health angle because animal health and environmental health is directly related to human health.
Hmm.
COVID-19 is the best example of that because the disease was a zoonotic disease that eventually, spread across human beings. So, a lot of developments were done for tackling veterinary diseases, for example. And while the law has not been passed, the angle is still human health. And it does include some very minor animal welfare provisions, which is still good, but there's a lot that is missing because almost always, actually always, it's always the human angle that's considered the most important. There are a few examples, and one of them is actually from the US. So there was this huge disaster called Hurricane Katrina that happened in 2006. There were a lot of casualties and a lot of people's animals died. And
Mm,
what happened there was a lot of people were unwilling to leave disaster zones because their pets were left behind. So they just didn't move, and over 600,000 dogs and cats mostly they died. And as a result, because there was an issue of human safety, that people would not be willing to leave the animals behind, they created a new law that it is a responsibility of the government, the Disaster Management Authority in the U.S., FEMA, that they have to ensure that there's transportation available for pets in disasters in the U.S. There
mm,
is another new law that was passed in the US that was by a district or a state in California, I can't remember. But what they did was they developed a shelter that was open to both humans and animals. Right now, we can't even have a conversation in Pakistan in building disaster zone shelters that are both for humans and animals.
mm,
And while we may not agree to the fact that animal cruelty is directly linked to domestic violence, which is, and to me, is a disaster. Women rights should be, at least acknowledged there that they're missing, and men mostly, abuse those pets and use them as an angle to drive women out. And we don't have a single shelter in Pakistan, women's shelter that has a space for animals, because these kind of things are not studied or acknowledged.
mm, mm. Absolutely. And then comes our education system. We just spoke about the legal system. And in fact, I think it comes before all of this and can perhaps be the first learning point towards interspecies justice when we talk of environmental concerns. But our curricula, they reinforce non-interdisciplinary methods and only human-centric approaches. What additions to our curricula do you think are needed? Since you yourself teach interspecies justice law, tell us about the course that you teach and how it is possible to incorporate more of that into more curricula around the country.
So I think on a basic level, what we lack is the poverty of empathy. That's what I call it. That might be a new phrase, but the thing is, we lack curricular anything that's just based on the basic principle of empathy and ethics. We don't have that in anywhere in our education system, and as a result, there are losses on every possible side, including human beings. So when I call these interspecies justice courses, they're not introduced by that same title because nobody in Pakistan is open to the fact. But what I try to argue is that there's the One Health angle and it impacts human lives as well. So we should cover environmental and animal health as well. So as a result, I've taught these few courses. One of them was Wildlife of Pakistan, which I taught at LUMS. I taught environmental law at NUST, and there we covered wildlife law and animal cruelty laws from the angle of the environment protection. And before that, I taught public international law, and we covered most of the international law treaties that were linked to wildlife. Because you have to work with the system that you live in, right? You cannot change it on day one. So you use whatever the system is at that point and try to include the things that you want to teach. That is what I have done, and I've been successful at it. And in January, I'm going to teach the country's Pakistan's first ever food system policy and law course. We don't have one. That's
Mm, mm,
bizarre, but finally a school agreed. So it's a lot of effort, but that's like the university level. I have a very strong recommendation, at least for before primary,
mm.
that these children need to be taught basic ethics and empathy
Yeah.
outside of religion. I mean, you can include it, but you need that. And we are missing a lot of empathy towards, even humans. I haven't covered this, but our disaster management law has a section 37 which says no discrimination against people, but it does happen. The Sindh floods that happened, people so far have not, all fully received their preparations. The people, I mean, the government went in and built a small house that has no privacy for women. 6 people are living there.
Mm.
It's not accessible for person with disability. So even that human angle is missing. So how can I expect them to understand the suffering the environment and animal has? We've not even crossed the human side of things.
Hmm. Yeah, but that still doesn't mean that we give up, becoming the voice for the voiceless. Deforestation is already an environmental issue in Pakistan. Forest cover is significantly below the UN recommendation of 25%, we are, I think, somewhere between 2.2 to 5%. Um, um,
Yes,
we need more trees. That is something that we already know. And we know that flash floods
yep,
and such disasters, they kill trees, and that which leads to soil erosion, exposing plant roots,
exactly.
uprooting trees and plants, and impacting their ability to basically respire and grow. Now, plants and trees are literally suffocated when this happens. It's a reality that we need to imbibe, that nature can also be suffocated. It's not just about humans being suffocation, something that we only understand in that context. Now, is there a need to increase our forest cover and slow down the urban sprawls? I know this is something to which most of us already know the answer, but just to also get your perspective into it, what would you say about this?
I think you've made the best possible argument that you can make to an educated Pakistani that would, work. And it does work to a lot of good extent. Um, but yet we are building houses. We're trying to build this new transportation system. I'm sure you've heard about the yellow line.
Yes, yes.
And while I have no issues with the yellow line in concept, it should not be built in a space where you're cutting thousands of mature trees that even if you cut them down, the possibility of replanting them is almost zero. But that science is not there. Mangroves, for example, were cut in Karachi to build some housing societies, and they're very important for preventing floods. Uh, I would say that, and I have a solution for that. It might be a bit hard to implement, but we currently have our environmental protection laws, the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act, which has been modified by all provinces because it's a provincial subject. There's a requirement for an environmental impact assessment before any project is completed. It is strongly recommended that a biodiversity element and a loss to the environment element has to be specifically added from the perspective of preventing disasters. So it's kind of like a disaster environmental impact assessment. I wrote a very long paper on it, but I think if we have that, we can use the environmental perspective to actually prevent disasters.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, but I want to go back to the same National Disaster Management Act, and I want to read Section 2, Clause C, and you will see that something's missing. So it defines disaster management means managing the complete disaster spectrum, including one is preparedness, two is response, three is recovery rehabilitation, and four is reconstruction. You would see there's no prevention and mitigation. It's not there in the law. So our policy as a result is not about preventing disasters, it's about managing them.
Yeah.
And what I call that is political saviorism, because
Hmm.
that's when the government comes in, oh, we saved you. That's political charity. That has got nothing to do with helping the people.
Hmm.
And so far, they have not been helped. And the case in point of Sindh is very, very relevant.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And a lot of us don't know that trees themselves, they offer a kind of flood mitigation by basically
Yes.
intercepting rainfall and helping reduce surface runoff. Also, they offer resistance, I think, to the speed and flow of flood water. Perhaps also offering resistance for those who are drowning or being swept away by the floods, absorbing rainwater and reducing soil erosion. Uh, Flash floods bring with them diseases which are expected to intensify as global temperatures rise. For example, they drive a sharp rise in dengue fever and cholera. Rainfall and
Mm,
increased humidity creates both of them, they create ideal breeding conditions for diseases, not only in humans but again also in animals. Now, how cognizant are we of this fact, and are there any measures ever taken to attend to the increased disease outbreak in animals after such catastrophes they strike?
the answer is zero, unfortunately. But if people don't care about the animals, which they don't, they should care about the humans. So if you're managing disease management in animals, you're ensuring that zoonotic disease spillover doesn't happen to human beings. Even from that perspective, it's still missing. So that would be my unfortunate answer.
Hmm. All right. And maybe at a personal level, people do look after their cattle and their farm animals and the
They
diseases
do.
that they
They do.
develop. And that is
Absolutely.
more like a personal effort rather than something happening, at a more official level, where there's also more awareness raising and trying to tell the public that this is something that we should also be attending to. Food web destruction, changes in water flow, all of this can disrupt food chains. It also impacts the prey availability for example, the wildlife, and it can lead to population decline for certain species. Uh, do we have any record here in Pakistan of elimination or extinction of any species due to recurrent floods or deforestation for that matter?
Uh, Not at this point because it's not in the government's interest.
Hmm.
But I would love to do one. Yeah, sounds like a very good idea.
Hmm. Hmm. Because I'm sure, when these calamities they strike, and they take down the number of these species, whether they are animals or some other type of species, that sort of does maybe
I
eventually.
mean, what you're referring to has to be more, clarified and put into law. And a lot of academics, including myself, we term this as ecocide, and
Hmm.
I'm sure you've heard that term as well.
Hmm.
Because and at this point, we have not created any laws that tax or criminalize environmental harm,
Hmm.
and as a result, you can just go get away with it. It's mostly civil trials,
Hmm.
and you just have to pay a fine or you just have to shut down your shop. That's it, which is a serious problem.
Hmm.
Um, and that can change by having taxes on, like, for example, carbon taxes that can help reduce the cost. But there has to be an environmental crimes provision in our laws, not just in Pakistan, but globally as well. It's still missing for a reason we both know, because the developed nations don't want to acknowledge harms as a
Hmm.
result of making more money.
Absolutely. So, what about the fish? We know that flash floods can flush fish out of their habitats, introduce pollutants, and alter water flow. Uh, that can impact fish populations and their ability to reproduce, and pose a threat again to biodiversity and ecosystem stability, something that we do understand, but again, fail to do anything about it, despite the fact that at the end of the day, that does affect humans as well. Uh, Fish are displaced and their nests are destroyed. How badly do you think aquatic life is affected? For example, in the recent floods, where there was a lot of a heavy flow in River Sawat as well. If we talk in
Mhm.
that context, or maybe generally speaking, what would you say on that?
So initially, I would say from the human side of things, fishes actually are the primary source of protein for people living in these communities, which are most highly affected by the floods. So they've lost their most efficient food source initially. Secondly, the thing is, you've not just destroyed their habitat, you're basically ensured that there would be no fish development or fish hatching in that area for a very, very long amount of time, because fishes need like a specific temperature, specific pH level. And when oxygen depletion happens because of rising temperatures, or algae is developed as a result and oxygen cannot come in, or even if there's a minute change in temperature, which happens a lot due to these floods, or if the species, for example, only lives in a freshwater environment, including our dolphin, we would basically are just eliminating that habitat from existence. And while we're not, killing the animals per se, we're just giving them a death sentence. So from an animal perspective, of course, that's extremely important and it's, very cardinal for me. The thing is, when you remove any species in the environment, you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. They have a very specific role. Some of them are responsible for management of oxygen, ensuring that it flows down to the sea where the sunlight, for example, cannot reach. Some of them are important in the predator-prey relationship. Some of them are, extremely important in managing the temperature and the pH levels. So if you lose one of them, it's a complete nightmare, not just for them, but for the environment and the humans as well, which is in many situations irrecoverable, or a flashpoint, as we say in environmental law.
Yeah. Just to wind this up, if you could just
Hmm.
tell us what we need to do to develop effective conservation and management strategies to salvage other species. I mean, whether it's doable or it's not, that's besides that's like another question. But as an academic, if you would like to just throw some light on that, how we can
Yeah, I think it is absolutely doable, and I think we need a very realistic One Health approach or interspecies justice if it's possible, because because not a lot of us will, fully be open to the idea that we need to only solely protect animals and the environment, but they will definitely be open to the idea of protecting their own life, which is the human angle. So
yeah.
use it. It's still missing. Start with that, the One Health angle, and prioritize the human health perspective. Everybody will, jump on board.
Hmm.
And secondly, we need to ensure that we work on preventing disasters versus managing them, which is kind of our current strategy. And that's always going to result in a failure because we will never have the resources to do a proper response. The people in Sindh are a perfect example of that.
Hmm.
Secondly, we need to ensure that we, focus more on interdisciplinary approaches at every level of education, even trainings of people who run the country. They need to know these things, that there's an intersection between animal, environmental, and human protection. They don't know it.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, for example, I would not term, I mean, the dogs, for example, it's directly linked to rabies and a lot of diseases spreading for humans and animals. But the current way of shooting them is still another, disaster-centric approach of just
Hmm.
getting rid of the entire problem. While
Hmm.
we know that we have been doing this for 78 years and it's not worked, we need to change the way we do disaster management completely and focus specifically on the prevention angle. Then, on the other side of things, we need to have more justice-oriented approaches, and I generally believe if we include all humans, there is a very good possibility of including all animals as well. There need to be gendered approaches. For example, these houses that the government built in Sindh need to have privacy spaces. That's very, very basic. It was missing. You need spaces for person with disabilities. You need to ensure that you're using multilingual languages. For example, if somebody loves their dog or animal and they don't understand the language that's being used to, show the warning, it's not going to work.
Hmm.
And we need to increase more access, and schools need to particularly at a much, much lower level have courses on basic empathy and ethics. I'm not saying disaster management, they lack that.
Hmm.
And as a result, it's just a confusing system that causes more and more disasters. So more and more people die as a result. So use that initially, and it should work, it will work.
Hmm. That's a very, I would say, effective way to sum it all up. The effects on all species, whether in the face of flash floods or any other climate change and global warming triggered catastrophe, they need to be understood. And this is not just about, one kind, one being kind to another kind, but also about salvaging the environment and our planet, because by just focusing on human-centric losses of disasters, we cannot save the world and its numerous ecosystems that also sustain us. Altamush Saeed, I am very grateful to you for your time and for your invaluable input. Thank you very much for joining me. Till next time, Allah Hafiz and goodbye.